Hi, in this video I'd like to share with you about 5782 on the Jewish calendar and how this is a shmita year and what this means for us even as believers who are living all over the world. So let's get started. A year of faith. So rabbis are describing this year ahead that's starting in September 2021 as a year that should be marked by special faith. And now what do they mean by that? Well, it is a shmita year, and the shmita is described in Leviticus, where farmers were commanded to work their field for 6 years, but on the 7th year to rest the land, and it is to be a Sabbath to the Lord, a time of not sowing their field or pruning their vineyards. Now, that is happening right now in this year that is ahead. Now, can you imagine, in the midst of the COVID crisis and all the things that are going on, that farmers in Israel are to let their land just rest? What about their finances? What about their income? It's really hard to fathom how someone would do this. But this is the walk of faith. The walk of faith is obeying God even when it doesn't make sense and seeing Him provide. So we're going to look at how this works out, how it has worked out for the Jewish people, and how it may apply to you and I as believers in this year that is ahead. First, I want to share the story of a man named Moshe Daninu. Now, he was a farmer in Israel who heard about the Shemitah, but he didn't keep it. One reason being that he was a supplier to McDonald's in Israel, supplying tomatoes. So 1994 came, and that was a shmita year, and he didn't rest the land, and that year was a mysterious infection that affected his tomato crop, and he lost a significant amount of his crop that year. Fast forward to the year 2001, and in the year leading up to the shmita he had a bumper crop. And in addition to this bumper crop, he was contacted by the tax office, who told him that they had overcharged him in previous years and they were now sending him a check for 20,000 shekels. So with all this in mind, he could just see that the provision was coming in and that maybe it was time for him to keep the shmita. So he decided to rest the land. Now, the one problem was that he had a whole lot of Arab workers. And, how would it go regarding them? Maybe they would find another job and he would struggle in the year afterwards. However, that year there was an Arab uprising and there were many riots and protests, and none of the Arab workers were able to come to work any of the vineyards around him or even his own field. So it was just as well he had laid them off for that year. Whereas other farmers who didn't keep the shmita, they were struggling to harvest their crops that year and to cultivate their fields. So there was a blessing as he obeyed, even though he didn't know what the future would hold. And maybe there's something here for you and I as well in terms of the year ahead. We don't know what it's going to look like, but I believe God is looking for us to be people of faith who will walk with Him and do things His way, and we will experience His blessings. Now, I want to touch on the curse of the shmita. So, Moses explained that if they didn't keep this 7th year of rest, then there would come a time when they would be exiled from the land so the land could have its rest. And this is exactly what happened and is described in 2 Chronicles, that the people were exiled from the land of Israel after their sins, after falling away from God, and the land got to enjoy her Sabbaths, her rests that she had not had while they had been in the land. And so the land of Israel was to rest for 70 years. So the judgment on the nation of Israel became linked with the cycle of the 7 years that God had ordained. So just as God had blessings in store for His people as they kept this 7th year, He had promised He would provide for them. He had promised He would keep them safe. On the other hand, on the flip side of the coin, there was also a judgment linked into this very cycle. Now the prophet Daniel, he recognized the 70 years were about to come to pass, and he began to intercede for his people to return to the land of Israel. And as he did, he had an encounter with God in which God spoke to him about 70 weeks. And those 70 weeks were about the end times and about the times that we're heading up to. And it foreshadowed even the time of the Great Tribulation of 7 years. And so perhaps that too will follow the shmita pattern of judgment. I'm just laying it out there, and originally got that idea from a teacher known as Mark Biltz. So moving on, the curse of the shmita has actually affected world markets. So in 1916, 1917 was the shmita year, and 40% of the US stock market value was wiped out. The German, Austro-Hungarian, Russian, Ottoman empires all collapsed, and Britain almost went bankrupt. That was all during one shmita year. 1930-31, 86% of US stock market value wiped out in the worst financial crisis in modern history in the shmita year. 1937-38, 50% of the US stock market value wiped out, global recession. World War II, shmita year. 1944-1945, end of World War II. And the victory parade was actually on the final day of the shmita. So it wasn't a major financial catastrophe that time around. 1972-1973, 48% of the US stock market wiped out, global recession. 1979-80, US global recession. 86-87, 93-94, 2000-2001, 37% of the US stock market value wiped out. 9/11 happened. The Great Recession, or global recession, hit the stock markets shortly after 9/11. 2007-2008, 50% of the US stock market value wiped out. And in 2014-15, there was another sharp fall in share markets at the end of the shmita year. Now we don't know what the future holds, but there is certainly a pattern here of many shmita years seeing times of great financial difficulty. And it doesn't take a prophet to look at world finances and see that there is trouble ahead. Our countries are all in massive debt. Our finances are being played havoc with because of COVID and all the things that have happened. Sooner or later this will come back to bite us. But the message of the shmita year is to trust God even in times of financial difficulty, do things His way and see His blessing. And I want to share with you a story on this theme, again from the land of Israel. It's the story of Komemiyut. Now God promised in Leviticus 25 that He would provide a blessing on the Jewish people as they rested the land, so there would be enough to keep them through those years. Now in 1951-52, a small agricultural settlement had been established in Israel which was Orthodox Jewish. Now most of the others around were secular. However, these guys wanted to abide by the laws of Moses. Now they had just barely started when the first shmita year came, so they rested the land as they built their buildings and got ready for the year ahead. Now as the shmita came to an end, they needed seed to plant their fields and to get started with the first year after the shmita. However, they needed to find seed that was not from the time of the shmita year, not from crops grown in the shmita year. And that was easier said than done. In fact, at the end, all they could find was some worm-infested, moldy seed hidden in a dark, damp warehouse. They asked the owners if they could have it and how much it would cost, and the owners just laughed and said, "You can have it free of charge." So they took that dirty old seed and they got ready to plant their fields. Now all the surrounding farmers had planted their fields in September of that year because that was the time to plant, and they planted with good high quality seed. But no rain came that year. No rain in September, no rain in October, and all the farmers around this community were looking more and more desperate as time was going by. Then came November, and this small community planted their field with this really poor quality seed, and the day after the heavens opened up and the rains poured down. And within a few weeks it became clear that they were on track to get a bumper crop, and all the surrounding farms had small crops that were really struggling. It became known throughout Israel, and many farmers went to see firsthand this miracle. And they saw the principle that as these people honored God and did things His way, which at times didn't quite make sense financially, they could see and experience the blessings of God. Now, I need to clarify that the Jewish understanding is that the Shemitah year does not apply to Gentiles, and I agree with that. Does not apply to you if you're a Gentile farmer, and also does not apply if you live outside the land of Israel. However, being a Shemitah year, there is definitely a reminder of the importance of doing finances God's way, even in a time of challenges. For example, let's keep up our giving to mission, keep up our giving to the work of God. Let's not lay that aside even when things get difficult, but let's keep on giving, and let's keep on following and obeying God. Let's be where He wants us to be. Let's do what He wants us to do. Let's not let the situation of the world dictate how and where we go, but let's follow Him and obey Him and enter into His blessing in the time ahead. There's a second blessing linked in with the Shemitah. So the first blessing is provision. The second blessing is safety. Leviticus 25 says specifically that as they were to rest the land, they would dwell in the land in safety, and ultimately they'll get to eat the fruit of the land. So how on earth does not farming the land keep you safe from enemy invasion? Well, there's a very practical example from 2014. It's known as the miracle of Kibbutz Sufa. So at this time it was the Shemitah year, and Orthodox Jews were looking for a field to harvest early so they would have grain for the upcoming Shemitah year. And they found a field in the kibbutz known as Sufa, which is very close to the border of Gaza. And so they harvested that field earlier than normal. Now, 2 days later, there were 13 terrorists from Gaza who emerged out of a tunnel hidden in the midst of that field. And no doubt those terrorists were expecting to be hidden among all the grain that was supposed to still be there. But because the field had been harvested early, they found themselves in a big open terrain, and within moments they were spotted by keen Israeli eyes in disguise, and they were neutralized. And these terrorists had plans to come and attack a nearby community, come and attack a nearby school. So there was a protection on this kibbutz as they simply kept the Shemitah year in 2014-2015. So the Hebrew year 5782 is already shaping up as a year of many challenges. COVID, finances, I don't know what else there could be, but let's wait and see. And the lesson of Shemitah is to trust and obey God, follow His commands, do things His ways, and He will provide for us, and He will protect His people.